in cities like New York and San Francisco, and to a lesser extent Amsterdam, in the beginning of the 1980s, if I remember well. It was completely new. No one knew what kind of disease this was. So there was no difference between experts and lay people. And of course, the medical community, especially medical researchers, started to immediately work very hard on defining the cause of this knowledge. But they were very much also inspired and steered by stakeholder groups of homosexuals, because first they thought this is a disease that only affects homosexual people.
That's how it was detected, that these people were most affected. This is why it was kind of immediately connected, as if they are just really undivided.
That's why some people would also argue, well, you see, you brought it upon yourself, if you're against same-sex relations, etc. But
that created a strong bias,
but the point is, that created a bias also in the sense of, well, why should we work hard to find a solution to it? Because you deserve it. But of course, the gay community in these countries and in these cities organized itself to influence medical research. And they steered it in a particular direction, and now it is recognized that because of this steering, they actually were quicker and more efficient in their research than if the medics had done only their own job. So here is something, a completely new type of disease, and there are probably, if you are aware of healthcare problems, more than I am. There are other examples. We know that patient organizations, particularly, do influence research, and that this is for the benefit of research. It speeds it up, or it steers it in directions that the medics would normally not go. Now, for economics, it's probably a little bit different, but in the course of time, in economics, certainly in my country, we have come to agree on, say, 10 basic indicators, which are essentially easily recognizable for everybody. I mean, everybody knows what the growth rate is, everybody knows what an unemployment rate is, everybody knows what inflation means, everybody knows what an interest rate is, everybody knows what an export deficit or etc. I mean, that's not so difficult. And the general experience with participatory and deliberative policy analysis, where you involve not the entire public, because that's impossible.
Interested, affected, interested, active.
Or you make a kind of selection in such a sense that deliberation is still possible. Say 20 citizens. That kind
from
of
different groups, from different backgrounds.
Yeah, right. That represents the total audience, or maybe you replicate those 20 citizens 100 times over in different regions. And if you involve them even in highly technical policy issues, like, is the soil on which my house built toxic? That's why my children, if they play in the garden, come home sick, which is a pretty technical thing. They are involved. They understand the science simply because they are interested. It affects themselves, and of course not everybody will, but the more intelligent part of them will, and they will be able to represent the interests of the larger audience or public better than you as an expert will. So in that sense, the idea that ordinary people don't understand expert knowledge may be true in the sense that if you just pour the expert knowledge over the heads of all the public, yes, they will get lost. But if you involve segments of the population into one particular policy issue, they will usually be able to grasp it very well and steer it in directions and bring perspectives and ideas on the policy table that would not have been there if they had not been involved. And this is exactly the purpose of why you do it. You want to break out of the ordinary rut of expert knowledge or of governmental policy. You want to bring new, innovative ideas to the table. And then you have to involve ordinary citizens because they come up with that.
Colleagues, another round of opportunity to ask the question, raise a concern, share, your thought of where the public policy studies or public policy work should go, should not go, where is it more, demand in Russia, because we also want to serve the current needs, because I believe, many academic and policy-oriented, studies, have to look around and see where the most need is. So that might be interesting to hear from you in which particular field you want to serve after you get a diploma, where you want to be, using that.
Not a question, opinion.
Comment.
From my point of view, if we talk about Russia, not Western Europe, North
so far we learn in
America,
this country,
so
right?
there is no big problem of understanding of public policy decisions, because we don't have public sphere at all. We got only some kind of sphere that we can name, this is public. But if we look at definition of public sphere, it's completely not. So the question is, in my opinion, how we can implement public sphere in Russian society, maybe on practices of Holland or other Western European countries. How we can implement, because when people talk about...
Introduce the deliberation, public sphere in a way that people share ideas and come to understanding common problems.
Because a lot of people who work as public analysts or in sphere of public policy, they told that the main obstacle is our government, our power, President Putin himself, and different people in his окружение.
And in policy elites that
yes, and policy elites in Russia. But I think that it's not true. Of course, in some ways it's true. We can talk about it, but there is no demand from ordinary people, and public policy cannot create this demand. Maybe with the help of media, with social media, we can do something. But if we only speak about the problems, we cannot do anything.
But even in westernized democracies, it is very obvious that just talking in general about the public or civil society doesn't help.
You have to, distinguish which.
You have to indeed have, first of all, media that somehow organize public opinion and create debate. And nowadays, of course, the fact that there are so many, these kind of things, they help, as we all know. The question is, do they help on the long run or only on the short run to organize demonstrations, or do they really help to create political debate which is impactful in the longer run? And the other thing that we have discovered also in third world countries and so is that only non-governmental organizations, be they churches or religious groups or civil associations that have a small territory, for instance a housing project or a park project or a forestry project, only when citizens are willing to unite their efforts and create particular demands and a particular debate and are able to voice it as a more or less organized group, then it will have an impact on municipal and other types of government.
I can make many examples, because what I believe Artyom is referring to is there no broad organized space where all citizens of Russian public would be debating on everything that they are concerned about, though some internet sites and some issue-based topics are very, very boiling and creating ideas and solutions. But what we do know with ecological studies, and there was in our, and I believe Sasha will join us, Sasha, right? You will join this work, right? You agree? Because what you're doing is very much connected to that, because your topic is on women who are migrants, who are coming here with no permission to work, but they still have no access to the work of the health care, but they're still giving birth to kids who are absolutely out of that system, so they cannot get any aid, and they cannot get any aid to kids, and they are all illegal, and their problems become even worse because they know where to place these kids, and they're given to Russian kids' homes and so on. But the question is, if we're developing the policy for that, how can we involve those people shaping up those policies? And the question is, who could organize this poor woman who in many cases are not very outgoing and strong to make up a community, and who would work with them? Because the question which goes for particular decisions, when communities were really taking this idea of development, either to have big enterprise, which will be polluting and giving them jobs, or instead having individual enterprise work. And with a journal which Irina Hali, who's working in our department, that's why I know it very well, it was done together with Scandinavian countries. We're doing on ecological projects with communities. They would be coming to villages in Karelia and in Pskov Oblast, in Murmansk Oblast, and discussing those things. So it ought to be a knowledge put in the middle. Because the people left without information, without understanding, they're lost. And they're told by administration there's no way out. This is only either this enterprise which would pollute everything, but each of you would have, 200 rubles a salary. And they have to agree, because they're fatalists. You hear the lecture, right? They just obey, they buy what they're given. But then the analysts come in. From that journal, the Russian ecologist and the foreign ecologist, and say, no, there are other solutions. And they organize a meeting of the village. And there are only, 5 families come first. And they start discussing the opportunities of developing, small enterprises that are done by each family. How can they develop the products and sell them? Next week, there will be more people coming, and then they start building these businesses, and then they survive, and then they grow. And these messages are coming from many places, but what does it begin with? The people who are disadvantaged, who are without job and without any means of, development, they're lost. They're exactly the fatalists. They accept what they're survivors. So the role here is for analysts and for people with knowledge, because they know alternatives. And this is where I think the role of you should be. That you should go to publics that are disadvantaged, that are lost, they don't understand alternatives, and bring those solutions. So in your case, the women who have without, but they were coming brought by the employers. So it was not even their will in many cases. So they've been brought in there, but not given official status, and then their kids and everything got officially out of the legal system. So someone have to give them that power of knowledge to get together, to organize and start influencing both the job givers and give their rights and get their influence on having their recognition, the status, the healthcare system and so on. But somebody have to do it. And the question is, they should be social organizers, that's true. But they won't be effective if they don't have the knowledge. Because the knowledge provides saying, what are the budget opportunities? What are the legal opportunities? What they can demand, from whom can they demand that? And that are different skills that you have to acquire during studies. It's not only knowing the history books and not only knowing the opportunities in economic development and the course of government, but you also have to have a skill of organizers, on conflict mediators, on people who have the knowledge of social workers, because this is where I see the interdisciplinarity of the program like ours. And I know several others that are close, that focus on public policy as a practical means and human rights, that really develop these organizational skills.
This is one of the reasons why we are, together with Hal Kolbech, no longer talking about policy analysis, but about policy work.
Right. Because policy analysis, you put on shelf. Where does it go? You have to work with people to involve them in making this.
It's not only about thinking and about creating knowledge, it's also about really actually bringing people together and kind of force out or tease out debates and give them voice. And this is much more than just analytical activity and publishing in fancy scientific journals, etc., etc. And this is having the real impact. Let's face it, President Obama started out as a community worker in the black communities of Chicago, which when I was 19, I traveled with an uncle of mine who was living there, and we really had to close the windows of the car because it was too dangerous. It's supposed to be too dangerous. Now it's an ordinary go way. If you are in Chicago, you can just go there. It's civilized, it's quiet, it's peaceful. So it may work, but of course there are political systems that do not actually allow people to work that way without having personal sanctions. I mean, interestingly, let me tell this, I've been working in a Tempest project with other Russian universities, not this one, and I've always said, well, I'm interested in doing comparative work with you. Let's compare healthcare in Russia with healthcare in other countries. And when we had Russian students coming to Holland, they would do that. They would write dissertations or theses about that topic. But I never found any colleague who was working in Russia at a Russian university prepared to do honest comparative work because they were afraid.
Afraid of what?
Afraid
of
that
communities, of going out, working with people?
Afraid that their peers would not appreciate what they were doing. Why would you only work in comparative work where Russia would come out worst?
In that sense. So
in that sense.
It might show that what you have in one community
and to
is...
be completely honest, because
Right.
I mean, and others, the person would also have to look at it because you publish it, so it becomes public.
Right.
What you were saying, and obviously they were not willing to say it openly. In private discussions, oh yes, no problem. But to publish it.
Right, because I want to test it on your particular scenes, because I know, for example, Belyaeva is writing on the security issues of Pakistan and how it might affect the countries of neighboring and Russia. Who do you think would be your client? Who would you think be a beneficiary of the work you do? Who would you address it to?
Most probably to the governments of the Russian Federation and my country. Because security issues usually related with the state, so there won't be any private. Maybe there are also private corporations also interested in it. Like for example, let's say Gazprom has interest in Central Asia, and it has signed an MOU with my country
industry.
So the weapons industry, absolutely.
Weapons industry might be interested, but as far as my my thinking is to my client should be the governments of both the countries who should because currently the relations are going in a very cooperative manner. But there is, as far as when I was working for my institute, I used to work for the Institute of Strategic Studies, Research and Analysis. It was a hired gun, as you said, but it has started initiated research on Russia, and they had made a branch on it. It was a new initiative because we have started collaboration with the government of the Ministry of Defense of Pakistan has started collaboration with the Ministry of Defense here, and there have been high-level exchanges. So they initiated a branch there in my institute because to know each other and to know each other's interests in Central Asia.
But the question is, don't you think that the publics, I mean the people of Pakistan and Russia, because there's always a sort of anxiety that there's people in that area are kind of too militant and we should be afraid of them. Don't you think that the publics of both countries would benefit if you kind of disclose that and kind of show that there's kind of less to fear about, and there is a way to positively cooperate? Because I think even security studies that seem to be so much government oriented have to be shared with citizens, because otherwise they feel the neighboring country or the country is close to the borders as a potential enemy or the potential threat.
But
so that's now...
There was a public opinion in a poll in Pakistan two years ago where they asked if you like United States of America or Russia or China. But the figures in that public opinion poll was more favorable to Russia than to the United States of America. So people in Pakistan have I don't think so they have any bad views about Russia or Russians, but they have a very very negative point of view regarding the Americans, and it was vice versa during the Cold War. So, and now currently it is now Russians are much more are much more favored by the people than the Americans. So
But not the vice versa very much, because people in Russia don't know much about Pakistan. Everybody knows about India, and India used to be a friend from Soviet days. But Pakistan, you know, as a Muslim, as a strong power, having nucleus, you know, it's looked upon as a threat. So there might be a lot of sense to share some of that analysis with Russian audience, so they can read it, at least in an analytical way, and kind of recognize there are some positive developments going on. And that's, you know, a general meaning. So if you only spread your knowledge in a very narrow field of experts and governments, you kind of miss the attitude of the broader public that may kind of return in a very negative way on shaping up government policies.
Maybe, yeah, that's like one of the main, I would like to address it in my research. I didn't think about it, but now I'll give it a thought.
No, I believe this is for the themes where we have a lot of people working with human rights issues, or with you know, particular communities, like when I mentioned Dasha or Yula, for example. You're doing with educational policy, and who would be your client? Educational policy and human rights. Who would you direct your analysis? Who might be the beneficiaries? Oh?
Students and professors.
Students, see? Now that's already a different thing. How would students know about that? So that's very important thing, that when you would be working and making your analysis and the outcome and advice, that you have to involve some of the student community to have the questionnaires, to have the debate, because otherwise you might produce something the students said we're not interested, right? And if you're willing for them to benefit, right? So this is kind of a simple thing, but very few of the students have that gain, and let's hear from others.
Well, because I'm thinking about my experience in public policies in Mexico, I'm thinking in this country, and I'm thinking in Europe also, and I believe that we are forgetting one important variable, a neo-institutional variable. Neo-institutional variable. We have different institutional frameworks, organizations in Europe, in this country, and Mexico. And in my country, for example, of course, we have something similar to this organization where academics and bureaucrats and population is working together. But I know, because in practice I did, that we are working in academics and we have this research, I go with the bureaucrat, you know, this is a recommendation. And he's thinking, you know, this is not very good for the interest group. I'm working for these people, it's in the power. And of course, I was in the street, I asked these people told me what they think about the problem. We have this result, this information. And I know that at the end, we will take into account the opinion of the people only if this opinion is in favor of the interest of the group. This is the reason because academics and bureaucrats are not working very good in my country, because we have different frameworks.
Institutional frameworks.
We have different rules, culture, and
more public space, less public space, more culture of debate, less.
I would say, I mean, we are, I am not disregarding that. I've all, as my students now can testify, I've told them from the very beginning, policy analysis is not only about puzzling, about analysis, about cognitive effort, it is also about power.
Yeah.
In the sense that the problem is that if you want to have real impact on the real world, you need to sell your policy analytic message also to those in power somehow. And sometimes they are just dead against and you have no chance. In other cases you can feed them salami tactics in different parts, and generally they may come to change their mind. But you're absolutely right. I mean, policy analysis is not only about analysis and knowledge, but it's also about power. In the end, if power and knowledge are against each other, power wins. If only because power can define what is valid knowledge. But fortunately, you could say that in the long run, policy ideas may come to infect the minds of power holders, and then gradually it could change. But it may be a generation or more. So Weber already, Max Weber, the famous German sociologist, was one of the founders of social science. He wrote a famous essay, Politics as Vocation. And he said politics is like drilling holes in hard plates. We have to be very patient and do it again and again and again and again, and then in the end you may have a result.
Probably.
I want to conclude on a positive note because we're already working, hour and a half, and we, thought of that seminar about hour and a half. I really believe in public sphere. We don't have enough of it, but we do have the beginning. And I think it has to be realistic. We cannot create for the country of 130 million, one public space. There are many public spaces for different kinds of public. And I just don't see in a very clear future that anything but big federal channels can pretend that they have in the public of the country. What is really happening is that smaller communities creating their own public spaces. The question is how to connect those communities into networks, so how they can work together on common problems and common issues. And this is why we in public policy studies really want to work closer with media studies and with media as the actor. Because it's not only television and radios and papers, it is very much social media, it's also media, and it's communication, it's connecting people. This is why we very much believe in this kind of text analysis and how people can connect. And I know there would be a seminar on media policy on kind of networks on internet very soon, probably in a week. I'm really interested to come, because this is a new way of creating public space. And this is the true opportunity, because the whole work of connecting and blurring boundaries depend on two variables. The people who are ready to share the knowledge and the means they can use, which are the media. They can be more knowledgeable and more skillful in that. They can have those tools in their hands, or they can not have them. So then their knowledge only stays in their own head and do not spread more than to their class. And if they have those tools of spreading the knowledge, the attitude, the possibilities, the alternatives, they have to work with media. So I would very much welcome having as more integration as possible with the Media Communications Department, because they have the tools that we don't have. But we have the knowledge that they might not have. And in the future studies for that whole field, we need to invest as much as possible into kind of broadening that public space through communication tools. And some people even define public sphere as merely as communication. I don't believe it's enough, but there is a definition that public policy is nothing more than just communication, if it's effective. So I just have a good final statement that I was withdrawing from Rob's talk, is that what public policy, what we're doing, what I think we're doing in our department, in our laboratory that we will make on international level, is generating knowledge that has a policy relevance. So that's what I ask you to do in your dissertations, to generate knowledge which is policy relevant. So say something new, produce something usable that people in decision making in every field, whether they're public or whether they're media or they're decision makers in governments and banking and business, that they can relate it. And it's also very interesting that this usable knowledge also makes of data, and data with meaning is information. That's what I learned also from formal concept analysis people and data mining. But then to make information with goals makes the knowledge. Because if you do not have a goal, you can't even create a knowledge. There's no kind of knowledge on itself. Knowledge can only be applicable to goal. So this is why we force you to define in your dissertations what's the goal of your research. And many of you have troubles with that. So work on that. Make it very clear, because if you're not clear on the goal, we cannot have a knowledge, because it won't be usable. So just focus on the goal, because I think of many sciences, and probably this one is one of the most goal-oriented. Would you think it's a true statement?
As a matter of fact, what you just said comes down. It's one of the things that I said in my first lecture. Knowledge is not a noun, it is a verb.
Oh. Good. Yeah, because each time you have to define, is this a knowledge or it is not? Because can it be used by whom? For what?
But knowledge has to be enacted in order to develop. If it's just something on the bookshelf or something in your disk, then
it
doesn't do anything.
Right.
It ought to do anything, and it does things only in communication with other people. And that's making knowledge from just something stored to something that works and that is usable. So it's actually a verb, it's not a noun.
Good. So why don't we, congratulate Rob on having this seminar with us. Thanks a lot. And I believe this is all for today. And I just welcome the students and colleagues to go and read these suggestions, because you may decide which course you really want to take. And we